launch of Stratos.
Yeah.
This was mine as a kid.
As a kid? Look at that.
Saved
Wasn't that long ago.
And then I saved it for like, what, 39 years, and I gave it to my children, and then the things just start to fall off.
Yeah. When you give anything to a child, that's what happens. Guide to construction costs.
It's a little outdated.
Is that outdated?
It's only a 2020 edition.
So they've changed drastically since then.
Yeah, I know.
I don't even know if any of these are real.
I remember getting those, and I looked through it. I was like, yeah, this clearly doesn't represent.
These are definitely outdated.
Yeah.
I mean,
even in 2020, they were out there.
Yeah. This is.
So my name is Mark Bittoni. I'm the principal of Bittoni Architects here in Los Angeles, California. We mostly specialize in housing of sorts, either multifamily or single-family residential projects. Our office has been around for 20 years. This actually is our 20th anniversary, which is kind of cool. 2025.
Congratulations.
Thanks. Yeah, didn't think I'd make it this far. But look, I'm with you.
That's right.
So it's great. Let's see. I originally went to Ohio State for undergrad, UCLA for graduate school, worked in various offices here in Los Angeles, and just fell in love with the city and happy to finally be contributing to it.
The first thing that came to mind when it came down to architecture is the idea of simplicity when it comes to the way you design, and the importance of simplicity in terms of architecture, because that's always been something that's been a big topic. The same way that Steve Jobs defined it when it came to designing the iPhone.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So give me kind of your 2 cents on simplicity in architecture.
Yeah. I mean, I think what's it's sort of like simplicity equals clarity. And I think that's what's really important, particularly in like the multifamily projects that we work on. It's you're limited in terms of what you're able to push in terms of the envelope of design, right? And so the idea is to really, have a refined palette, and the idea of like, and sort of the cliche of like form follows function, but the idea that everything is essential to the project. And so if you know that you're going to have this limited palette, design with that intentionality with it, and then I think the building becomes much more clear, and therefore it becomes simple, and hopefully it also stands out because of its simplicity, right? There's a couple ways you can approach a building. You can sort of throw a lot of things at it to sort of distract, right? From the size of it and the scale of it. Or you can kind of accept that and then try to generate some kind of strategy or motif that is kind of simple, that is able to, sort of be legible when you look at it. And I think that's actually really interesting.
For sure.
This is a multifamily duplex that we worked on, right?
Right.
And, you can see like geometry-wise, it's very minimal in sort of its approach.
Okay.
But sort of each one of these openings responds to, behind it is, it's a public space that's exposed, right, with balconies. And then these represent, each one of these is the bedrooms.
Oh, okay.
And also part of the reason why this is so solid in the front is because it's on Melrose, so it's like heavy traffic.
Okay.
And so noise becomes an
it's a noise issue, right?
Actually, the street's about 5 feet off here.
Right.
So
this is literally right at the roadway.
It's right at the road.
Okay.
There's actually a suite of these, so there's 2 of them.
Okay.
And they kind of respond to the scale of the other homes that are along Melrose.
Okay.
But then this kind of, I think, becomes a much more sort of minimal thing, and I think because of that, it kind of stands out.
Right. Right. Yeah. It's a cool design. How long ago was this?
This was actually our first sort of multi-family project that we worked on. So these are 2 duplexes that are side by side. So it's 4 units altogether.
Okay.
So yeah, this is the first one. I think we finished this in it was completed in 2017.
Wow.
Yeah. So
you actually built this. I mean, it actually came to fruition.
Oh yeah,
it's part of it.
Yeah, this one was completed. And then it's kind of funny. It's like we went from this, now we're up to about, I think, 350 units.
Yeah.
So a few amount of years. It's
yeah.
kind of crazy. So,
it's very good.
Yeah,
in terms of your placement in the world of architecture, you've got your Frank Gehry's, you've got your guys that are more into, for example, people who do galleries and people who do museums and people who are very specific in their niche that they focus on. As an architect, where do you see yourself being placed, or is there a position that you see yourself being placed in?
I mean, well, I'm a very small part of like a much larger profession, but I think
you're too modest.
No, it's true. I mean, there's a lot of people that I think would do this really well.
Yeah.
I think where my role is to kind of sit between like this, being able to bridge the gap between design and developer mentality,
Right.
right? Which is kind of important.
Yeah.
And then also respond to a the greater city fabric, right?
Right.
So it's kind of like I'm trying to. One is to respond, create something that's beautiful that the developer can actually execute and performs to what he needs,
Yep.
right? He or she
Mm-hmm.
needs,
Mm-hmm.
and then also make it so that it fits within the urban fabric of Los Angeles.
Right.
So I think that's kind of my
That's actually a really interesting point that I actually never even thought of. Is the best architecture would be the one that's not only beautiful but efficient, and you're actually able to build it.
well, yeah.
You
Otherwise,
know,
then it's just going to be on paper,
right?
right? And I think
Exactly, and we see a
that's
lot of
the
that, by the way. We do see
yeah,
a lot of like the it looks great in terms of like the preliminary design, but
sure,
then when you dig into it, then ultimately there's issues in terms of being able to construct it,
sure, sure.
or the expense of building
The
it,
expense,
right?
and then you see it kind of pared back. So in a
Yeah,
lot of ways, you'll see our projects are very minimal and
yeah.
simple because we know that we're trying to sort of proactively
Reduce
design with
costs.
those constraints,
Right,
knowing
right,
that there's going to get so the idea is if like the whole fundamental thing of our apartment building is that it has this one ornamental piece, well, that's probably the first victim,
right,
right? And
right,
so
right,
if the whole thing is hinging on that, then you're going to be in trouble.
right, right.
So we try to take that out of play from the get go.
From the beginning.
Yeah, but
Okay,
also I don't
okay.
think ornament necessarily has. I mean, it has a place, but it's something
No
that I'm
practical
not
use.
that I'm particularly interested in.
Right,
So, yeah,
right.
yeah,
It's actually a good way of doing it, because it kind of eliminates a lot of the issues that even at our stage that we see,
hmm,
right? If you're eliminating the issues of high cost early, meaning like you're looking at a design, you're like, okay, this is simple, nice,
sure.
efficient. There's a more like higher likelihood of being able to actually like get a shovel in the ground with a project like that.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah,
So
yeah,
that makes
yeah,
a lot of
yeah,
sense. Actually,
yeah.
does make a lot of sense. The biggest challenges that you see in the multifamily space as an architect. This is a question that I address in different ways all the time,
Hmm,
because we're on the more the cost end of things.
sure.
So we're looking at it from a little bit of a different perspective.
Right.
But from an architectural perspective, what do you think the biggest challenges are in today's landscape of building either multifamily or mixed use projects here in LA, specific to LA?
I see the challenges are actually getting better, right? I feel like the what's interesting is like the state actually keeps like bringing new programs to the forefront to increase density in the housing, to to generate more affordability, and I think that actually is great for
Mm-hmm.
future multifamily developments. I
Right.
think, of course, the biggest challenge that we have is, of course, rising interest rates, right?
Right.
Which
Yeah.
becomes kind of
With the cost of debt. Yeah.
right, exactly. So I
Yep.
think that initially is something that uh, is a barrier.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but after that, I think, then of course the permitting process,
Right.
right? So I think there's got to be kind of an in between. Like here in Los Angeles, we have like the ED1 program,
Mm-hmm.
which allows for just 100% affordable housing projects to kind of like get to the front of the line and get permitted really quick.
Yep.
But also, I think that there needs to be mechanisms for mixed affordability
Mm-hmm.
units to be able to also move forward,
Right.
right? And I think that's probably the biggest challenge is, we can get a project to a state a certain point, but then there's this kind of 9 month to 12-month window where we're just getting sort of planning approvals.
Right.
And I think if there's a way to kind of
Too long.
eliminate that for everyone, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's unfortunate that it takes like either an affordability or homeless crisis or
Yeah.
a wildfire crisis in
Yeah.
order to implement these kind of things.
Yep.
Um,
That actually is something that, um, coming from Canada, I've actually seen a lot of that in the U.S. That
mhm,
the U.S. and particularly California is more reactive when it comes down to implementing better processes for
sure,
everything.
sure.
So, like you're saying, like it takes a fire or a major homeless crisis for them to say, "Oh, now we got to fix this." versus being ahead of it, being more proactive and saying, we know that if we don't do this, there's going to be a homeless crisis, a fire, or something bad will happen.
Sure,
So we're going to stay ahead of it to prevent that from happening. So I've seen a lot of that's a big discussion I have with almost everybody because it's prominent in every area that I've seen so far since I moved here 11 years ago. It's kind of like one of those things, and it could be fixed so easily by just being proactive and doing what needs to be done. You know, I mean
Yeah.
that's just an opinion.
No.
Yeah,
I know.
yeah.
I agree. I mean, with with regards to, like, for example, like with the Palisades rebuild or Altadena, it's like one of the things that I get a little bit nervous about is, the idea that specific plans are being jettisoned, things like that, that actually do kind of control the sort of the fabric of the neighborhoods, and so, you know, I well, I mean, this is my own opinion. Is like I
Yeah.
actually feel like there needs to be more sort of architectural regulation in this city. I'm
Right.
probably one of the few architects. I don't know if architects think that way, but I just
Makes
see
sense.
the things that go up,
Yeah.
and I think that there needs to be more thought to, like, something that is there to last more than the next 10 years,
Right.
but really the next 20, 30,
It's like
50,
the
60.
longevity of it.
Yeah, the
Yeah.
longevity,
Yeah.
right? And I think that's
Which
one
is
of
what
the
happened a
things.
long time ago, by the way. If you look at the 20s, 30s, 40s, they built for longevity, right?
True,
I
true,
mean, if you look at some of the, I
true,
mean, I live in a
true.
1942 and my house, it's 2025 now,
Right,
is still completely relevant and standing. And
right,
we still have original features in it that are still working,
right,
right?
right.
Most
Oh
of it,
yeah,
right? Whereas today, if you look at you know, I mean, something in 50 years from now, what's being built right now, I don't know if it's gonna stand up to the time. This is a thing that you and I both, um, I'm sure, address a lot. Is getting people out of the mindset of let's do this to the bare minimum standard versus like
sure.
let's do this well, create a building that's a better building that's going to not only get higher rents but sell for more in a decade or
Sure,
or 7 years or
yeah,
whatever their
absolutely,
time frame is to
absolutely,
stabilize the
yeah,
building, right? Like there's a benefit to staying ahead of the curve, let's call it that. There's a benefit
agreed.
for everybody to stay ahead of the curve
Right,
versus like you know saying let's just do the minimum necessary to cut costs up front,
right.
you know.
No, I absolutely agree.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I mean it's hard to convince people who are writing the checks like you're saying
Well, I
to
mean,
to,
the
to think
stakes
that
are
way.
so high. I
Yeah.
mean, so you can sympathize with that. You
Absolutely,
understand.
100%,
Yeah, yeah,
100%. But looking at it from a long game perspective, I'm only assuming that, um, you know, the ultimate goal should be looked at as a longer term goal. If they're not gonna flip it right when they're completed the building, right? It
correct.
should be more like, what does this look like in 7 years? What will this look like in 10 years?
Right.
Will it still be as appealing and as considered a robust building or apartment as it does today?
When we approach this, it's kind of like the idea that you are building communities within a
Right.
community, right?
Right.
I mean, the building is its own sort of
One
ecosystem,
hundred percent.
right? And you
Yeah.
want people to stay. You
Yeah.
want them to want to stay in
Yeah.
the place where they're at, and so I think these things need to be, amenity rich,
Uh huh.
right?
That's a big one.
Yeah, I think it is. I
Yeah.
think a lot of it because with, well, especially now with ADU laws that can kind of take
Mm-hmm.
away some of those
Mm-hmm.
amenities,
Mm-hmm.
it kind of strips that from people. So then I think people then want to gravitate towards things that
Yep.
have more of these amenities, whether it's
Yep.
rec rooms or working spaces or
Yeah.
hybrid working spaces or rooftop decks or
Yep.
things like that. I think that's an important part of this, and so
Yep.
I think that's kind of where the mindset really needs to be, is really how you are setting these things up so that you know a collective of people are existing within
They're
this
getting
building.
together.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Collaborating more.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And I think that's done with, I guess I'm biased, but I think it's better design
Mm-hmm.
or better design
Yeah.
design strategies,
Yeah.
um, but also providing more amenities and better materials.
One of the things that we were dealing with now when we do kind of assessments for people for developers,
Sure.
when they're looking at design,
Mhm.
is they're going from this decision making of do we go subterranean in terms of parking,
Right.
which is expensive, or do we do surface level parking, which takes away from some of the amenity space? and then outdoor space, right? Because you have to replace it with parking.
Sure,
You have to
sure.
have parking somewhere for people.
Yeah.
So the dialogue is, you know, is that cost saving sufficient enough to reduce the rentability or the rental rates of the units because you've removed some of those amenities from the space? So what's your take on that in terms of balancing that out?
Right. Well, I think it depends on the project and where it's located, right? So if you're in an
Good point.
infill project,
Yeah.
right, an infill and sort of on off a major boulevard in the city,
Yeah.
then I think the sort of on grade parking makes more sense, right?
That makes sense. Yeah.
But
Yeah.
but at the same time, you are kind of you are creating the separation between the first floor, right, the urban,
Right.
the streetscape,
Right.
and sort of elevating everything up, which I think is okay in this regard.
Right.
Where it gets a little bit stickier, I think, is when you're starting to look at on major thoroughfares
Right.
where the whole building is elevated. There
Yep.
really isn't a connection to the street level,
Right.
and I think that's when I think it's a detriment to the building.
Right.
In terms of, it's interesting. I mean, people talk about mobility and how like
Mhm.
over time it just doesn't seem to be moving as fast
Right.
as the
Right.
regulation. So we have been jettisoning a lot of parking,
Okay.
but at the same time, we have projects that are under parked in
Right.
like K Town, which
That
is
actually happens.
it
Oh,
happens
look
a
at that.
lot,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And there's people sleeping in their cars
Yeah.
overnight to
Yeah.
make sure that they get a parking spot
Right.
early, and so that
It doesn't
is
seem appropriate.
that
I don't
doesn't
know.
seem appropriate.
No.
And
No.
so until the infrastructure of the city kind of gets to a certain point, autonomous cars and
Yeah.
things like that, then
It's happening.
maybe it's happening.
Go ask Elon Musk how it's going.
Right. Yeah.
You know.
Right. It's not doing so well.
Yeah.
But at the same time, though, those aren't inexpensive at this point,
No.
right?
No.
So there's a barrier.
Right.
Like same thing like with like EV charging, right?
Yep.
All of
That's
our
a big one.
projects, right? All of our projects, like there's an EV component,
Yeah.
but it doesn't meet the demand
Right.
that's there,
Right.
and so there's actually like
slow.
it's too
Yeah.
slow, or
Not enough
it's
spaces.
not enough
Too slow.
spaces,
Yep. Yep.
and the problem is that then you ultimately there's also kind of an economic divide for electric charging to some
Yeah.
degree, right?
Yeah.
And so that also I think is a problem that needs
Yeah.
to be addressed.
Yeah.
As it becomes more ubiquitous, as people,
So, just keeping on this like parking platform that we're talking about
Mhm.
here, what's your take on using the various allowances to get rid of parking altogether? So whether it's TOC or any one of these, like let's do no parking in the building. Like, what's your take on that? Because it seems to be happening more and more and more.
Yeah.
That people are eliminating parking in areas where transit is is easily accessible.
Well, I mean, that's where it makes sense. I mean,
Yeah.
it makes total sense.
Yeah.
I'm a big proponent of less car. I mean, contrary to what you might think.
Yeah.
I'm kind.
More classic cars, less normal cars.
Yeah,
Let's do that.
With the idea, but also it's like, I'm holding on to this car that's like 60, 65 years old.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So it's in some
May
way
not have the emission standards of today's vehicles.
understood, but it's
You also don't drive it very much.
Right, exactly.
Right.
But the fact that it's existing as opposed to throwing
Yeah.
it away,
Yeah.
right? So I think that's important.
It's not just a paperweight.
It's not.
It
Just a
actually
paperweight.
does run.
It's an Italian paperweight.
That's right.
I think that parking has always been, used to be one of the biggest challenges, right?
Yeah.
Because you would reverse engineer, like, if we were talking about a project, just as many as like 6 years ago,
Yeah.
you would be reverse engineering a project by, okay, well, I can only fit this many cars, therefore I can only have that many apartments.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
Well, that to me is kind of like, that doesn't make any sense.
Yeah.
So, to be able to kind of take the cuffs off and allow for increased density on these projects and not have it tied to the parking is,
Right.
I think, is crucial.
Right.
So I do think that there's a nice hybrid. We haven't done a project yet where it's zero parking.
Really?
There's always some. It's basically as much as you can get,
Yeah.
either one level of subterranean or a
Yeah.
grade,
Yeah.
and then that's your fixed parking,
That's it.
and then you go from there.
Right.
Which I think is probably the right way to go, right? Because not everyone does have cars, and people do. I mean, I might be aged out of it, but I know that plenty of kids don't like to drive.
Yeah.
Right.
They like to ride e-bikes.
Right. They like to ride their e-bikes.
Yeah.
They like to take their Ubers, whatever,
Yeah.
but they don't necessarily are engaged with the car in the same way. So I
Right.
think that will start to change. And those are some of the people that are, moving into these developments.
Right.
The younger people.
Right. The younger people. Unlike the older people like us.
Right. The thing that drives me nuts is we're I feel like the housing that we're looking at is only for a certain kind of demographic,
Right.
right? It's this
Right.
kind of post college to whatever to
Yeah.
30 years old. And I
Yeah.
think that there's that, or you're looking at like senior living,
Yeah.
but
Senior
there's no real
residences. Yeah.
idea, like, there's no real, I don't think that there's much market, there's much that's being developed with a midlife market, right? Where it's
For
sort of
families or
for
for,
families,
yeah.
right? You don't think
Yeah.
about that with
No.
apartment living. But if you go
No.
anywhere else around in the world, people live in a, vertically, right? They live
Yeah.
vertically, they live in
In other
apartments or
countries and
condos and
stuff.
things
Yeah.
like that.
Yeah.
And it's like here, it's like, it's just taboo.
It's aligned with, I mean, even in Toronto where I'm from, they suffered that same problem too. They're building, you know, thousands of like boxes in the sky for, 1 and 2 bedrooms,
Right.
tiny, what, 6, 7, 800 square foot units.
Sure.
And that eliminates the people who have 2 children, 3 children that need to live in the downtown core, the midtown core.
Right.
It eliminates their ability to actually live there.
Yeah.
So one of the things that's on the table now, I believe, as far as I know, is building larger units and giving incentives to architects and developers that are in the, building these units.
That'd be
Like,
great.
that's what they're trying
Yeah.
to do
Yeah.
now.
Yeah. Yeah.
But again, it goes back to, and this is, I know it's Canada versus the US, but it goes back to the being reactive versus proactive.
Sure.
The Canadian, the governments in Toronto and other areas like it were behind the 8 ball, or whatever however you want to frame it, in terms of like getting to that point where they were incentivizing larger units for more families because they
Sure.
were so focused on just throw up your condo, throw up your condo, throw
Right.
up your condo.
Right.
So it's everyone just looking at the short term versus the long, and that's what caused. Right now there's like a stalling out of condo development in
Right.
Toronto.
Right.
So it's going to happen everywhere unless people get ahead of it. So my hope from an architecture
Mm.
perspective is that architects are doing what they can. I know it's very difficult, but like what they can to educate people on trying to do more with the space that they have to create those opportunities for families.
Sure.
Right?
I think one of the problems is that, so one of the untapped, I think, project types here is like condominiums.
Yeah.
So particularly in
Apparently, only
California,
3% of what's being built.
yes,
That's what they were talking
and
about
yeah, and
yesterday.
so
Three
that's the
percent.
biggest problem. But the
Yeah.
problem is that the statute of limitations for being sued,
Yeah.
it's much greater
Yep.
right here, and
Yep.
so architects are scared. Like my own personal like errors and omissions insurance,
Yeah.
I think I can only do something like, I think it's like less than 10% of my gross revenue could be in
Really?
condominiums. Otherwise, I
Really?
won't get insured or I have
Okay.
to pay sort of, through the nose.
Yeah.
So the thing is that,
That's interesting.
condos, I think, like I mean, that's how I started here with
Yeah.
home ownership was,
Yeah.
we were able to went from an apartment to buying
Yeah.
a small condo, the
Yeah.
condo then to a home,
Yeah.
things like that.
Yeah.
And so there aren't a lot of condos that are being built,
No.
and people are scared to do it.
Yeah. I think every
Rightfully
condo
so.
we've bid has never been built.
Right, right. And I
Yeah.
mean, the condo we moved into, it was a new development. It's called the T Lofts over there by Pico and
Yeah. Yeah.
like
Yeah.
behind by the Best Buy over
Yep.
there.
I know
And
it.
it was brand new,
Yeah.
and that kind of got hit by the financial crisis in 2008.
Yeah.
But what was interesting is, like, the first statute of limitations is the 4 year for the visual defects, right?
Right.
So of course the HOA, they start to get letters from lawyers right around the 3 year mark, right? They're
Yeah.
basically saying, hey, is there any problems? Do you see any cracks in your stucco? Is there any? The building was functioning just fine.
Yeah.
There were a few leaks and things like that, but the developer and the builder were taking care of everything
Right.
as needed.
Right.
It actually got to a point where the HOA then engaged in a lawsuit with the developer, and we went to sell our condo.
Yeah.
Well,
So
the
you
bank,
have a lawsuit on title there, right? You
correct.
have to
So
disclose that.
therefore, then the bank said we can only accept cash only
Yep.
offers.
Yeah. No loan.
For $750,000.
Yep.
You're waiting for someone.
Yep.
Unfortunately, you're in Los Angeles, and for some reason, people have $750,000 just sitting
Yeah.
around.
Lock a
Right,
building. That's
right. But I mean, the fact that that transaction couldn't really occur because of that,
Yeah.
is crazy. I mean, that was huge. I mean, when we heard that, I mean, we were freaked out. We didn't know what was going to happen.
Yeah.
Fortunately, somebody came in and it didn't really seem to matter.
Yeah.
But it's
Yeah.
huge, and and you're just like, okay, I'll never do a condo.
Yeah, and that is a limitation of condominiums, which is why apparently only 3% are being
Yeah,
built
it's a
in LA.
shame. It's
Yeah.
a shame. I mean, some of our co-living projects, to address your other question about like larger projects. Those
Yeah.
co-living projects, those do have 3, 4, and 5
Yeah.
bedrooms,
Yeah.
so they
We
could
just finished one.
accommodate.
We're just
Yeah,
finishing one.
and they can accommodate like unfortunately the leasing model isn't geared for the family to come in. It's
No.
geared towards individual like
It'd be very
rooms.
expensive for a family to go in with
Correct.
that
Yeah,
model.
it wouldn't make any sense.
Yeah.
But anyways, I think that like there should be this idea of like, I'm really fascinated with co-living as a concept, and I
Yeah.
think the way we're doing it is not quite right. I think it really the idea of co-living is that you would have an elderly couple with a young, postgraduate that's there, and
It's an
a
interesting
family.
dynamic.
No, but these people, and then the idea is that the community develops just like a street, right?
Yeah.
But it's in kind of a vertical format.
Yeah.
But the idea that there's learned knowledge from having the seniors being able to engage with the
Yeah.
children that are on their project, and there's learned knowledge and
Yeah.
shared knowledge and community,
Absolutely.
which I think would be great.
Yeah.
I got to get to that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It makes sense. And that's a dialogue that's happening a lot now, too, in that space, especially because we just are finishing the one up in Mar Vista, and the dialogue there with Greystar and the guys that are in the middle of trying to lease up that building is like, who are these people that are trying to get in there? And it seemingly is students who are, three or four guys want to go live together,
Yeah.
and they're kind of like, yeah, where do we go? So that co-living building is a really good way of doing that.
Sure.
That they go to UCLA, they go, one of the
Right,
universities in the area. This is like their 2-3 year plan
Right.
is to get a co-living space with a great common area, great common space, and they each have their own room and
Sure.
bathroom.
Yeah.
It kind of works for them.
It does.
I don't know what the other model of like divorcees and elderly and people like that. You're right. That's more of a
I don't know where they go.
learned. Yeah. Well, I mean, that's the trick, right?
Yeah.